Welcome to Subscriptions Scaled, sponsored by Rebar Technology. Join us each week to hear from industry leaders in the subscription space, share their best tips and stories, and learn how you can up-level your subscription business today. Hello, listeners, and welcome to another episode of Subscriptions Scaled. I am your host, Nick Fredrick. With me today, we have a special guest, Sanjyot Dunung with Atma Global. Sanjyot, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Well, great. Let's start at the beginning here. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Atma Global, kind of what you guys do and your role at the company.
Absolutely. So I founded Atma Global in 2003. We've been around for a while.
Okay.
We are a content company. We started off creating content on different countries, cultures, and global business issues, used as workforce training for people who need to know how to deal with customers and colleagues from different countries and different cultures. And then we were also used heavily in education market, any higher ed publications, books, textbooks. You get a video or you get supplemental curriculum materials. So that's what we have been doing for a long time. So we're really digital content, and that's our forte.
Okay. So you're actually creating the actual content, not reselling someone else's. So it's very interesting.
Yes. So we create all of our own content. We own everything. It's the methodology. We have our own content experts. We have our own video. We go in country. Sometimes we film, and we have been making all of our content since the very beginning. And as I said, we started on CD-ROMs. I dated myself right there. I know, having gone the whole tech cycle. And we went from CD-ROMs to DVDs to starting being integrated in databases. And that's a little bit about how we landed where we are today with starting our very own subscription channel. Like a lot of other companies, we found ourselves, the business model no longer was conducive to the way we were selling. Once upon a time, we sold through resellers. I like to say we were a little bit like manufacturers, if you will. We made content, and then we sold it through other companies who sold to corporations or sold to libraries. And it was really great when we were paid on a single product. But like the Spotify problem, right? Once you get dumped into a database, you're getting pennies, where those who own the platform were making all the money. So that made us a few years ago say, hey, we really need to rethink how we're doing this.
Yeah, we'll definitely want to dive into kind of that transition to direct to consumer, because we cover that off a lot. And I think that's the transition point where people learn a lot of things. But first, want to talk about that need. You've been doing this for a very long time, and as we become every year more and more of a global economy, and of course the past year has thrust us that much further into being an e-commerce global economy, how have you seen that demand change over time for those types of services? You talked about going into subscription, and we can get into that more, but just how has that evolved in the time that you've been doing this?
Very much so. It's explosive and exponentially explosive in the last 20 years. We've really seen folks who at one point really wanted to understand about a country or a culture. Maybe they've had the most senior executives really focus on that, to where in the last 10 years, we've really seen companies recognize that having culturally enhanced customer service, we train flight attendants, gate agents, pilots, for example, really everybody in that whole ecosystem, anybody who's customer facing, really needs to understand that your customer can come from anywhere. And part of it is not just that we were going global, we meaning as Americans, but really everybody else around the world were getting wealthier. They wanted to travel more. For example, they were doing business in different countries. We saw Asian companies coming to the US or to Latin America, Latin American companies going everywhere. So I like to say we're a globally centric outlook. We're housed in New York City, and that's where we're based, but really we're globally centric. It doesn't matter where you're going from one point to another. I like to think that we have content and that we can speak to you. So in terms of what you need and as a business person.
That's so interesting, and we could probably spend the entire episode just talking about this. So I'll try to.
I'm always happy to.
One thing that I've noticed in my career, having dealt more and more with people in different countries, is that certainly Americans like to come into a cultural situation thinking that the only difference between us is really a language. And if I can learn your language, then I really know how you speak. And of course, that's not the case at all. Is your demand mostly coming from US companies? You did talk a little bit about other countries and their people wanting to learn as well. Is that where you're seeing the shift go? Is more other regions and other countries trying to understand each other as well, or is the majority still coming from US companies trying to go international?
So I think as for our company, it's pretty much split. It's 50-50. And I think that most companies really do realize, as you said very accurately, it's more than just a language. It affects how people talk about problems. There are some cultures where it's a negative, or they don't want to actually identify that there's a problem. So you might be asking about project delays, or if somebody can make a shipment, or if they're going to be able to meet a deadline. And the answer is yes, versus being able to actually dive deeper and to really take a look at each and every metric within that deadline to make sure that people are able to meet it. How people communicate versus how they highlight problems, what their expectations are in hierarchical societies versus a relatively flat society. Like in the US, we have no problem expressing our opinions, and we'll do so loudly and widely. In many other countries, that's not necessarily the case. So really being able to understand that. And even now, for example, everybody's on Zoom, but sometimes the loudest voices get heard the most versus necessarily making sure that everybody on a team, for example, has the opportunity to provide input, to make sure they're not intimidated. So really helping managers understand how to make sure their whole teams virtually, especially if you have different people from different backgrounds and different countries and different cultures, how they're all participating equally.
Sure. Heck, even dealing with Americans, dealing with our different personalities can be a challenge. You start throwing culture into the mix, and I'm sure you could talk about this forever, but just I've learned that too. It's just sometimes people don't speak up because that's the culture says, when my position, I'm not the one who should address your question. And that can be hard for Americans, where you're just like, I can talk to anybody and they should be able to give me an answer. Just learning those differences can be key.
Absolutely. And you're very right. It's a reflection of knowing that nuance between personality, right? We all have our own unique personality nuances. And then the second factor is that none of us is simply one culture versus another. Really, we're a smorgasbord of different cultural reference points. And it's not just ethnic culture or countries, but if you grew up in the military, that's a culture. Sure. If you grew up in different parts of the US, those are cultural reference points. So all of that really comes in and impacts how we communicate, how we interact, and also very importantly, what we expect from one another. So those are the kinds of things that our content, that our methodology, that we really seek to address.
Gotcha. Okay, let's talk about delivery of your product. You talked about going all the way back to CD-ROMs and delivering it through those types of videos and how that's starting to evolve over time. I assume you guys have done some in-person trainings when it warrants, so delivering that in a lot of different ways. How are you translating that to this COVID and post-COVID era where we're talking about, we're doing this Zoom right now? And is that how you're transitioning the business to subscription, is being able to deliver it through digital channels, or are you trying to leverage that in different ways to maybe some of the old channels as well? Just how's the transition?
So as I mentioned, we actually create our own content. We have lots of written content and we have lots of video, and certainly everybody enjoys video. So a few years ago, about 2.5 years ago, we decided that the time was right. Bandwidth was permitting it. Streaming services were allowing it. There were a lot more platforms and tools. So we decided to create our very own subscription channel. It's called Atma Insights, and it is basically, I like to call it, hopefully no one will have a problem with it, but I like to call it Netflix for global learning. I wanted to make it very simple, very easy, a simple monthly or annual subscription. Monthly is $24.99, annual is $199. The idea was to create minimal barriers to entry for a potential consumer. We had been a B2B, basically going directly through our resellers. So we needed to shift to a direct to consumer. So we built our stack. We used Uscreen for those who may be interested in the kinds of models. So there are a number of platforms, but we did a lot of research and we wanted to make sure that we had a cost-effective solution that was both customizable and scalable. And we did indeed scale it. And we now have put all of our content on there, all of the videos, and we have two core markets, our corporate market, as we talked about a little bit, but also our professors, and how we meet each of their needs and how we're going out in terms of the marketing is a little bit different. But ideally, we want that customer journey to be very pleasant, very simple, very accessible, and make sure that they can get the content that they need.
So you were talking about corporates and professors there. So are you more like training the trainer here, where they're trying to get information about how to teach different cultures? Or can I, just as somebody who wants to learn better about how to talk to my client in Latin America, go onto the product as well?
The second, that's exactly who we're looking for. We want the lifelong learner for years. So our old, even though it's old, the CD-ROM through the databases, we had more than 3 million users over the course of about 12 years, which is not an insignificant amount. Like every entrepreneur, there's always a mistake. And my mistake was that we let our resellers keep those customers. So we don't know those 3 million people. We're really, in essence, starting a brand new consumer business from scratch, if you will. What we do know is that people like our content. We do know how to use it, and we do know how to package it in ways that make sure that it's curated, that it's very user-friendly, that our marketing material. So I'll give you two examples. Certainly on the corporate side, there are two different constituents for us. We know that the HR manager, for example, wants to make sure that they have lots of resources for their employees. Somebody may want to have professional development about time management. Somebody may want to have learning skills about culture. So we want to fit into that bucket, and we offer discounts. We're set up, for example, that we can do a negotiated discount by a corporation. So if you're an employee from a company, the company doesn't have to pay, but you have a special discount. So it's not even $199. It'll be some fraction thereof. So it's a very simple subscription. If you're doing business with, let's say, Japan and Brazil, and you really wanted to make sure you were ready for your meetings and your interactions. On the flip side, you may just want to be enhancing your career, that you're going to be moving into different places and you've got customers from different backgrounds. That's a lifelong learning, and we fit that model too, because the whole idea is the price points are much more affordable, much more economical, and it fits into, sometimes you might get it reimbursed, sometimes you might not.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. So those are on the professional side. On the educator side, we know how our professors use it. And we're creating a little bit of a shift, if you will, in the education market. It used to be that professors relied on publishers to get everything and get everything for free. You get your textbook for free because your students are paying for their textbook. And we said, and we also heard from our years of being in this, that professors were searching YouTube for videos, but then they didn't know, is the accuracy good? Are they reliable? Are they up to date? Who made this video? And also, if you're a professor, you don't have time, an educator, time to through tens and if not hundreds of videos. So we've basically done the work for you. We're reliable videos that you can't get anywhere else. But we also did one more thing. We're giving professors and educators a custom creation, custom mapping to their curriculum. So they send us their syllabus. We'll make suggestions, and then we send it back to them, and they can just integrate it easily into their course. And that's something that the pandemic heightened the need for. Everybody was so busy trying to fit the technology needs that they didn't have time to focus on the curriculum needs. And that's where we hope we can add value.
Yeah, absolutely. And that goes a long way. Curated content is what it's all about today, right? There's no shortage of content out there. It's there, but who has the time to sift through it all? So somebody like yourself who can do that consultative approach and say, all right, I see what you're trying to do here. Here's some good content that's going to feed into that, I'm sure is invaluable to them. Are you then, is the subscription service then being sold to the professor, or the professors are then telling their students to go get this subscription?
The professors are being sold. So we have a team that goes and talks to the professors directly. Okay. So they get a subscription, but then the students also get a student enrollment discount. So for example, it's $10 for a student per semester, but the professor helps to facilitate that. So it's very similar to the textbook model, but instead of giving everything for free, which is not a business model for anybody, I always wonder when people do things for free. Nothing is ever really for free. Somebody's paying for it somewhere. We try to make sure. So we have no advertising on that note, for example. We don't hassle our users. We really want to make sure that we're creating a very positive community of global enthusiasts, whether you're using it for your business or whether you're using it as an educator. And really, our students are becoming future business people. So in essence, we're hopefully following them and making sure that they have a positive experience and remember the content as they evolve into their careers.
Yeah, grab that lifelong learner when they're right there at the beginning.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
A little bit like a Wall Street Journal might do or a newspaper might do. Really that same sort of model.
Absolutely. So you talked about 3 million people having used your product and you didn't know who they were, and now you've gone into this direct-to-consumer model. How are you engaging with that consumer to grab them, make them a customer of yours, make them a fan of the brand, that somebody who wants to continue to engage with you for years to come? How have you shifted the business to that? What are some of the lessons that you've learned there?
We're still learning them, I should say. We had the misfortune of launching the site in February of 2020. If you want to rewind the calendar for a moment, you'll know that was probably not the best time to launch a product that was focused global, but we've certainly shifted. We do email marketing. We're very active on LinkedIn, which is where a lot of our users. So we have a really terrific digital manager who really tries to engage with different kind of content, free videos. We use some of the products like LeadSend, for example, which is basically, if you want to, it's like the white paper model, right? If you want to see a free video, you have to put in your email. So we're trying to build our community, but at the same time, we give them free previews. We're adding new content, so we notify our users when there's a new curation, when there's a new country, and helping them really be able to see how to integrate it. So we've had a lot of positive experience. Despite the fact that it was a pandemic, we won a few awards last year from IEL for e-learning, as well as a Stevie's for best new products. Some bits and pieces coming through.
Yeah. Any models there that you've tried that you were just like, that didn't work? We tried that, and that was definitely not a way to go here.
We're still tinkering with some of the things like Google search ads, and we've said, I don't know. So one of the things that we did very early on with the site was that the team thought that it would be great that everybody who comes, they may not know that they want to experience it right away. So let's have a pop-up with a coupon code. And we found that the coupon code was irrelevant. We didn't get the emails. People weren't using it. We sometimes could see customer traffic. We use a tool called Hotjar, so we can watch what they're doing when they get to our site. And with folks who literally, the pop-up coupon would come down, they would click it away, and then they would still go in and pay full price. And it left us scratching for why. So then we removed it. So we're still testing. We do a lot of A/B testing. We test to see messaging. We test to see landing pages. So we've added a bunch of new landing pages. I think that in hindsight, had I understood the importance of speaking to each constituency differently, we would have implemented landing pages from the get-go. We waited for probably about 6 to 9 months. And I think that, lesson learned, the landing pages are certainly doing a better job of getting people engaged. It feeds exactly to what they're talking about. So we have different landing pages for lifelong learners, institutions, educators. So we're trying to make sure that the funnel is targeted. When you have a new product, making sure that the top of the funnel is big and wide is always the hardest thing.
Yeah, absolutely. You talked about the landing pages there being tailored towards your corporate user, your professional or institutional learning. Interesting, since you do this cultural consulting, have you tailored those to any specific cultures in any way and seen any results from that?
You know, we have not, and I'll tell you why. This is always the hard part, and it's always the nuance. When you have a website, you're automatically global. You do not know where somebody comes from. You don't know how they get to you. So you really, in essence, have to speak to a potentially global customer. Even when we used to do our marketing, we grappled for a long time with, do we use American English or do we use British English, which is the more common spelling in many countries. Sometimes we would change the spelling in some of our content, but we then decided that in this global world, we're an American company, so American English made sense for us to use in marketing, and that was how we would speak to our customers. But those are the small nuances of the terms you might use, for example, and the spelling. So far, it's worked well. We've had no pushback on it, so I think it was the right decision for us. But you're absolutely right. We're always testing to see if different communities experience us. We do Google Ads, we do use our LinkedIn marketing. And for us right now, we're targeting North America, which is the US and Canada, the UK, and then another grouping is Singapore, Hong Kong, Australia, and New Zealand. And while that may seem a little odd of a grouping, it was defined by a couple of things. One, they're primarily English speaking, so we are currently only in English language. We are looking at some multi-language components of the site, for 2022.
Okay.
But we wanted to also make sure there was some familiarity with marketing. As you may know, but Australia is often considered a testing ground for American marketing, especially on the consumer product side. There's a lot of similarities of marketing strategy. So even though there are differences culturally, there are a lot of similarities. So we knew that we could test in these markets and get some best practices in place.
Okay. So in all of those markets, those consumers are all coming to the same site, seeing the same.
That's right.
Okay.
Same landing pages too.
Gotcha. Okay, when it comes to the enrollment and payment side of things, are you offering in-country payment methods, or is it all presented in US dollars?
So that's a really good point, and that is one of our challenges. So like I said, we use Screen as our stack, and they integrate with Stripe.
Okay.
So there are some limitations in terms of how that payment processing, in terms of certainly PayPal, there is a currency conversion. It is US dollar, and we know that might be an obstacle in some places. Ideally, I'd like to be able to add Google Pay or Amazon Pay, but we're not able to do that. And that's one of the challenges with a subscription business, right? You are adopting sometimes platforms because it's just not financially feasible for every business to build it all out by yourself. It's a cost prohibitive model, especially when you're in your early stages. So the stacks that you use, they have their own limitations in terms of what's doable and in terms of what's practical. So those are the things that we're watching. You're absolutely right. It's my gut instinct that there are probably some markets where people are not thrilled, but with the fact that they don't necessarily have an easy payment process locally. But most of the countries that are our early markets are very digitized. They're used to digital payments. So we're hoping that is less of a hurdle.
Yeah, absolutely. There's plenty of data that points to consumers like it when they see an in-country payment method presented in their currencies and in a whole amount so that it doesn't look like you just converted US dollars into my local. That's certainly, but you brought up a really good point there, which is when you're in startup mode, there's so many great tools out there right now that are in many ways plug and play that can get you up and running quickly. And you're coming into one of my favorite topics just around how do you make those decisions around, all right, this is core to our product. It's a differentiator for us. Therefore, it's something that we need to go out and build it versus the kind of thing that it's like, all right, this is a bit more of a commodity, or at least it's the kind of thing we can live with for now. So I'm going to pull that component off the shelf and plug it into my stack. How do you weigh those things out?
So for us, we wanted to make this really a product, a service, a resource, call it whatever you will. We still have our e-learning. We still do our customized business. So that part of our business hasn't moved. But what we wanted to do was have a functional test. And I have our internal benchmarks where once we have proof of concept, we'll take a look at customizing the stack. But as you said, so many new tools are coming on the market every single day that I'm not always sure that it makes good sense. We're not trying to own our own tech IP, right? Why not use somebody else's platform and really make sure? So some of the things that we looked at were exactly as you said. What are the payment features? How can you customize them? And is it scalable? So the fact that they have Stripe offers a PayPal component to it made me feel more comfortable because obviously PayPal is much more widely utilized. Another thing that was really important was the ability to at least make sure with the closed captioning on the videos, since that's our core product, could be multi-language. As I mentioned to you, we're looking at 2 major markets for us in 2022. And we've actually identified Japan, so Japanese, and the Arabic world, because there's no products like what we do. There's a lot in Spanish, there's a lot in French. Europe is pretty well saturated, not necessarily a site like this, but there's lots of video resources in those major Romance languages, if you will, French, Spanish, Italian. But there's nothing in these other markets. So for us, that's an exciting thing. So we wanted to make sure that the ability to at least have the videos in closed captioning with multi-language, if not the whole site to be localized. Our tech team also in-house, we took a look to see what was customizable in terms of the look, the feel. We wanted some branding that would speak to our customer base and our users. So those are the kinds of things that we took a look at to make sure. And was it an easy enough engine in the back end, the dashboards, all the features that we wanted to be able to do?
Well, you've laid it out there quite simply, but in fact, it actually takes a lot of discipline to stop, think about not only what are my requirements today, but what do they look like 1, 3, 5 years from now? And we can only predict the future so well, but to think about those things and then go out to market with those things in hand can make that selection process go so much smoother, but it's hard to stop long enough to do that.
Absolutely. And we basically had meetings twice a week for much of 2019, where we really went through several different platforms. So we did research some other platforms. We looked at the cost benefit analysis. We looked at the features. We test drove them. We sampled them. We even loaded some test content, took a look to see what was doable. And we decided that we wanted something that was the most flexible, given this constraint, so not any of them, and that would allow us to customize the subscription component. The subscription was the most important. So there are some that are very robust video platforms, but they had no customer subscription model attached to it. And they were not really being monetized as well. They were really more about how do you distribute video inside of something else. But that didn't achieve our goals. We really wanted to focus on the subscription component. We knew that people would pay for having access to this. And in truth, for everybody, Netflix and the other subscriptions, Spotify and everybody else, they laid the groundwork. They made customers expect that it was perfectly acceptable to have a subscription model for content. And so we probably have the larger players, if you will, to thank for it, but we're really in the learning space, and there's not a lot of companies in the learning space that do this.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Was there anything beyond the technology and its flexibility and scalability itself that you looked at when you were considering a vendor? And I personally have done some speaking at conferences around RFPs, and I've described it as supplier speed dating, where it's not just, okay, what can you do that meets this specific need, but where are you today? Where are you going in the future? Yeah. Are you a right cultural fit for me? Are you going to fit in with my team? So what did you guys look out for there besides just the core technology?
It's interesting that you asked that, because we're small but growing. I looked for a company, or at least a fit, where we mattered. Sometimes the largest companies are so big that you're not even a comma, you're not even a footnote, and the responsiveness in terms of tech questions, in terms of relationship management, was mediocre. So one of the things I wanted was at least an entity or a platform where they were really responsive customer service wise. You want to make sure that within hours, if you're down, if there's a tech issue, if something's going wrong, that there's a response mechanism and that people will get back to your team very quickly. So that was probably my biggest driving component, was how well they treated us as customers, because in essence, they have a subscription model and we are the subscribers of their platform. So
right. Yeah. Do you matter to them? Are you a small fish in a big pond, or vice versa?
Exactly.
Yeah, those are really important components. I guess the flip side of that coin can be, you want somebody that, yeah, they might be able to meet my needs today, but are they scaling? Are they growing? Right. And as we grow, are they going to be able to grow along with us? So you got to weigh all of those things out, and it's a tough decision to make.
It is a tough decision. One of the things that we did internally is we have some benchmarks that say, okay, when we hit these, if we notice some capacity issues, we've already soft circled what some of the next solutions might be. So we know where we might have to expand to, but even to develop that tech solution would be a good 9 months. And you would basically migrate your whole platform from the back end. So we know what we can do, but you're absolutely right. And in fact, some of those larger firms were very honest, one or two in particular, because I remember, they were very good about saying, listen, we're probably more expensive than you need right now, but we'd be happy to help you when you're ready to move over. And I think that we're going to be close to that in a year from now, or perhaps 1 to 2 years. So the good news is we have a path to getting there. But I think the most important thing you said, and that's very true, is having a 1, 3, and a 5-year plan. You want to certainly hope for the best and plan for the worst, but at the same time, you also want to make sure that you have a plan for how you're going to scale it upwards, and what your benchmarks are. You don't want to be caught too late and then your customers not necessarily get the best experience because you're bursting at the seams.
Yeah, you already touched on it there. One of the things that I always recommend, which is, okay, you can make that decision for today, but put those milestones out there, know what they are, that says, I'm going to reevaluate it at this point. Because it's so easy to say, all right, I've solved this problem, I'm going to set it over here and go focus on these 10 other things. But just keeping that in mind, because we unfortunately get brought into a lot of situations where they have outgrown a current vendor, or they haven't really looked at billing and payments in a really long time. And all of a sudden, paying the 2.9% plus 30 cents made sense when you were at $1 million. But once you got to 10 million, 100 million, all of a sudden, wow, that is a huge chunk of change to be paying for accepting credit cards online. People have just set it and forget it. And all of a sudden, somebody peels back the layer of that onion and it's, yeah, this is something we really need to look at. We probably should have done it 2 years ago, unfortunately. So having those
you're absolutely right. We use a project management software, Pivotal Tracker. There's lots of them though. But more importantly, the person who's the project manager on our team for this product is really very good at capturing these data points, if you will, these ideas, and making sure once a quarter we say, are we ready to start looking at this particular piece? If not, pushes it to the next quarter. If it is ready for that quarter, then we take a look and dive deeper into the issues. And I think you're absolutely right. It can get really busy, right? When you're wearing multiple hats, you're running every single day, constantly selling. That's the most important role of any business, is constantly finding new business opportunities, whether direct or through partners, to take the time to go through the strategic initiatives and finding ways, whether it's taking time throughout a week or whether it's really finding ways to do it as a team or through a coaching system, but really making sure that taking a look at the longer outlook.
Yeah, absolutely. Takes discipline to do it. There's just no way around it. But
Yes,
sounds like you
exactly.
got some good systems in place. We touched on it a little bit, but did you see any major shift in consumer behavior because of COVID? That brought a lot of things online. I did read a statistic, and I think it was payments.com that talked about, and I'm going to forget the number right now, but it was a pretty meteoric rise in e-learning subscriptions online throughout the pandemic. A lot of people use it as an opportunity to reinvest in themselves and do additional training. Did you see a big spike through that? And has that been consistent or has it plateaued?
Yeah, and in fact, we did see a big spike, which is probably why we created a lifelong learning landing page on the marketing side. We were responding to what we realized. We weren't having just an institutional sale at that point. People were kicking the tires to see how, and that was the whole reason for the price points in terms of how we had put it together. I think a lot of times people spent much of the year, when you're online all the time, it was really a question of what else can I do when you're online, and really making sure that there were additional tools. But I think for most young companies, the hardest thing, or a new product, I would say young product, really that's what we have, is getting the visibility, making sure people know that you exist, so that they will indeed come and test it out.
Yeah, yeah. Was there, we've talked about email and LinkedIn marketing and things like that. Was there anyone that stood out there as making more sense through that time, or was there one that worked for a while and has tapered off?
I think the one that has been iffy is the whole email campaign. I do know that emails work well for certain markets, but I think one of the challenges on the tech side is that companies, and most people are using their company email, firewalls are getting more sophisticated. So everything is being dumped into a spam folder. So it's really trying to think creatively of how you get around that, and it's not our problem per se, but I think all of the email marketing companies are having this as a challenge. So I think that tool is going to need to be revisited, because emails are very effective, but if they're not getting through, they're not effective. So that's one thing. The other is, I think a lot of people, us included, use LinkedIn, but I think LinkedIn is also getting very saturated. Again, that's our professional market. So it's really finding platforms where people can rely on the messaging, rely on the marketing materials that are coming through, and making sure that there's greater visibility. I think I read that Google, LinkedIn, all of these different folks who do the ad side of it, because there's a higher interest in digital advertising, the economics have gone much higher. So as a company, you're constantly having to weigh whether or not it's cost effective. The customer acquisition cost, for example, you want to make sure that a new customer, certainly we look at the life of a customer, not just the simple initial purchase, but those are the kinds of things that we take a look at internally. Yeah. I will say one behavior that's been interesting that we're just taking a look at, but I think that customers themselves are getting savvy. So subscription model businesses rely on auto renewal. That's the whole objective. But customers are getting a little bit more savvy about wanting to make sure that they're not automatically charged again. So being very candid, being very transparent, we make it clear to folks in their first email how to turn off their auto renew in their profile. And that's a cultural behavior. So there are some folks in different cultures who don't like that auto renew. It is not, they think they've purchased that 1 month and they do not want to be charged that second month. So those are the kinds of nuances that we find ourselves constantly having to tweak our wording, our marketing, to make sure we meet their needs, but don't impact our business model at the same time.
Yeah, with what you were saying right there, have you seen any challenges on the back end side there with maybe a customer who signs up and doesn't realize it's auto renew, with people calling in to cancel or chargebacks or things like that? When you go direct to consumer, you used to go through distributor models and have to worry about these kind of things. So all of this comes into play. How have you guys dealt with that?
Yeah, we still follow the old model of customers king. So if somebody takes the time to tell us that they're upset that they were auto renewed, we absolutely, no questions asked, will credit them back for that month or whatever time period. There is, and this is something that we've looked at on our e-learning side. So I'll just pause for a moment to tell you that there's a concept called Net Promoter Score, which is how do customers view your service or your product. And the better they view you, the more they're willing to pay you a premium. So for example, Starbucks. You're willing to pay a higher price for Starbucks than your corner coffee just because you value the brand, the reliability, whatever else you associate. And that NPS score is also associated with the fact that a dissatisfied customer can amplify that message much wider. So we really want to be very careful. So we take particular attention to make sure that hopefully we're never having a dissatisfied customer, and we follow up with them a few times and we make sure that they really feel good about the product and the service delivery. And in most cases, we can say that they did. On the customer side, I should say, we do a lot of work on how culture impacts service recovery. So that's a concept too. Different cultures have different expectations of how they wish a company to take care of them when there is a problem.
Sure. And you guys have the insights into what those cultural differences are, right?
Exactly. So we try to implement what we know. We're not always perfect, but we try our best.
Yeah, absolutely. It's important to take that approach. I've been doing subscriptions for over 15 years now, and to go all the way back to a day when subscription was still set it and forget it. You were trying to acquire that customer and then in most cases, hoping that they'd never remember that they signed up again. In very good ways, our industry has turned that on its head, and it's all about engagement now, right? It's delivering value day one and on an ongoing basis that makes them want to remain a customer. And that's more critical now than ever because there's the concept of subscription fatigue. There's a lot of competing services out there. There's a lot of different, just so many options, and not to mention technology that makes it easy to see what's being billed on my card every month, and sometimes even links to go in and directly cancel and to a bad degree to go to your issuer's website and dispute a charge, see the bad parts of that. But the good news is that we are now all about value and engagement, and in very good sure that the customer sees value in what they're doing. So sounds like you guys are certainly on the right track there.
We make an effort. And I think really it goes back to the simple thing. If you think about it for yourself, how do you want to be treated as a customer? So we try to make sure we emulate the same values when we're treating our customers.
Yeah. Fantastic. Sanjyot, this has been great information. I really appreciate you taking all the time to come on the show and share your insights and your background. Tell our listeners where they can go to learn more about the companies and maybe get in touch with yourself if they have some questions about anything we've covered today.
Sure. Our product website that I've been talking about is Atma Insights, ATMA Insights, INSIGHTS.com. It's got the S on it. And you can certainly reach me. Do you want me to give the email?
Yeah. Please.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll spell it for you. It's a little tricky here, but it's S as in Sam, P as in Peter, D as in David, U, N as in Nancy, U, N as in Nancy, G as in girl, and the company name is A as in Apple, T as in Tom, M as in Mary, A as in Apple, global.com. Awesome.
Again, thank you so much. I enjoyed our conversation and some really great insights there. It's great to hear about a brand that's not just gone, straight into subscription from the ground up. That's a lot of our conversations, but somebody who's transitioning into that and has some great content like yourselves and how you're now going direct to consumer with that. So again, thanks for coming on and sharing everything today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Subscriptions Scaled, sponsored by Rebar Technology. If something we said today resonated with you, please subscribe, rate, and download our podcast and share this episode with your network.